All right, welcome back to TNT Live. We are back. My computer is fixed or pretty much replaced, and Wyatt is now on his victory lap.
Too.
Yes, his. Sorry, that is our guest calling me for tonight, and I should have just muted it and texted him back. But yes, tonight's guest will be Benjamin Dichter, the spokesperson for the Freedom Convoy, and he'll be joining us later after we do some of the week's events that we led up to. So.
Wyatt, the last few weeks because we've missed so much.
Last week, yeah. What's happening right now? Wyatt gets a big victory lap in the sense that you are happy that Michelle Rempel-Gardner was excluded from the shadow cabinet. She was not allowed to play with the big boys. Makes you happy.
Yeah, not only was she excluded, but just that, and not only was she excluded, but I'm even happier that she did that stupid, man, we need to stop all this woke crap thing last week, as if she's not like the most woke MP in all of Parliament. It was so stupid to see that, and I'm happy that she got slapped down like 5 seconds after she tried to like buy it all back last week. I just love it when people actually kind of realize their mistake but still get punished anyways.
Yeah, so Michelle Rempel-Gardner, the classic one is that you wrote about is her apologizing for being a white woman. And then like, because I'm a white woman, I am apologizing. We really got to realize that that's just not acceptable in the year.
The funny thing too is people remember that was in the aftermath of that like mentally deranged person running over that Muslim family in London, Ontario. And it's like, while other local MPs are, like having fundraisers for the affected families and everything like that and trying to help them out, she's like on Twitter trying to like stand on their graves and virtue signal. Like, what a horrible person. And honestly, what I've heard it from in the background, just talking to a lot of people in federal politics, is just like nobody likes Michelle. And it's not something that only happened in the last 2 years where she went like super progressive woke. It's just she's always just been an awful person to talk to. She's incredibly full of herself, and she's a bully.
The story that broke the Erin O'Toole's Conservative Party was the ramming through of Bill C-4 and how it was done. And there's 3 people now. One of them is being promoted because of it. It has done quite well. So the 3 people you hear who are behind the C4 nonsense, which was like they called it banning conversion therapy, but it was really made it illegal to like challenge any sort of radical transgender rhetoric. That was Gardner, Melissa Lantsman, and Erin O'Toole. So that kind of broke the Conservative Party. And then it finally kicked him out once the Freedom Convoy came, which is a good transition into our guests for later. So Rempel-Gardner seems to be on the way out. We have a new Michelle Rempel, which is Melissa Lantsman, who's doing quite well on Iran right now. So we're going to leave her alone. We're going to leave Melissa Lantsman alone right now. She is very good on Iran, which is another important story that we'll just gloss over. The Iranian people are rising up against the Islamic Republic. This is amazing because the Islamic Republic is the worst cancer in the world. They have done foreign terrorist attacks. They fund terrorist organizations. They're the worst. And we should shoot the Ayatollah in the face.
That's why. Melissa Lantsman will eventually have to get to roasting her in like maybe a few weeks or months. We don't know. It might happen at some point. But she is tied to one of our least favorite things, which is also one of our favorite things to talk about. Second only to terrible polling companies is terrible strategy firms, because Melissa Lantsman is a longtime strategy firm employee, but I won't even get into it today because we should move on.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, it's easy. But keep in mind, in about 2 years, when Melissa Lantsman goes full Michelle Rempel, or maybe 3 years, when she does a full Michelle Rempel, we will be there to comfort you all with "We told you so." But for now,
it's getting tiring being the "we told you so" people. I think we were the "we told you so" people on Erin O'Toole, but the problem with being the "we told you so" people is no one ever remembers that you were actually the people who mentioned that they were like liberal hacks in the first place. I don't know. You just become the whiners. People just remember that they didn't like you pointing it out, not that you were right.
Yeah, I will say Stephen Lebo in the chat pointed out that Melissa Lantsman has really overperformed so far. And this is the old Michelle Rempel thing, is come in, be put in position to challenge obvious woke nonsense and go after, like, great on Iran. She was, at the time the Conservative Party changed to the Poilievre, right? Because this is one of my things on Poilievre is where I give him some slack on the freedom-y stuff. Everyone you talk to under the O'Toole thing, like the O'Toole era was a regime. It was no criticism, and anyone who spoke out against lockdowns or in favor of, we can pivot to Danielle Smith in a bit, the unvaccinated would have been axed and lost their job in the O'Toole regime. like Pierre Poilievre lost his job as finance critic for being too effective and overshining him. So this was some megalomania going on there. But Landsman is being put in position, and full credit to her on her policy on Iran, openly calling for regime change. Again, we should shoot the Ayatollah in the face and support the people of Iran, taking whatever means necessary to overthrow a corrupt Islamist terrorist leadership that needs to go and is murdering people. Like that's good. Like there's no redeeming things to the Islamic Republic. Like it's the worst case scenario. Like there is no way to get worse. So good on her for being there. And she was put in at a time when the Conservative Party under Poilievre had and gotten rid of O'Toole could now shift to being more like, isn't it time to end these COVID measures after 2 years? So she was able to sort of take the front line there. And then Trudeau calling her a Nazi when she's Jewish and like homophobe when she's a lesbian. It gives her all this intersectional armor to the party. So Poilievre sort of has like two deputies. Like I've got, brown guy to my right and Jewish lesbian to my left. So he's kind of playing that game, which I understand. It is Canada after all. Like we'd like Canada to be a real country where we could talk about things, but that's not how things work in Trudeauville. So, okay, whatever. She's good in Iran. We're going to leave her alone for now. But we will say I told you so in 3 years.
Yeah. We have Benjamin Dichter sitting in our kind of waiting room for the stream, but I just want to do one quick comment right before I get to him. It's just Robert Bracken said, keep the pressure on Pierre Poilievre, support him, but be wary of the stupid bureaucracy. And I love that you said this because I always find it so often that there's a popular political figure comes up through the ranks, they are elected the leader or they're just sort of a new rising MP. And it just becomes this weird freeze where you can't say anything like negative about them. When usually the negativity actually helps them keep performing well, there's this weird thing where like we're on the Conservative team, ergo you can't criticize the Conservatives, and that's how you end up getting Aaron O'Toole's is when everyone gives them the free pass because they happen to be a member of the team and are wearing the right jersey, even though they're openly undermining you. So I'm happy that people are actually noticing that. Yeah, Pierre Poilievre is performing quite well. I generally like his shadow cabinet picks. I'm not going to complain too much about any of that. At the same time, if he doesn't push forward what we want him to do on central bank digital currencies and move to stop that from being implemented and make sure that he doesn't completely cut out social conservatives and make sure he doesn't, fall into the woke stuff and make sure that when he actually is prime minister or when he becomes prime minister, he's actually hawkish on fiscal issues. That will be fantastic. But if he doesn't, then we'll actually criticize him. We won't just justify it. But without further ado, then I guess we should bring on Benjamin Dichter, who's slated to talk at the Emergencies Act Inquiry Commission. So it's great to see you here, Ben. And so everyone knows, he's like basically one of only 9 people who's going to be a witness at the event who actually had anything to do with the Freedom Convoy. And I think he's only 1/3 of those people who probably has a lot of expertise in order to counter a lot of the liberal narrative. So it's great to have you here to talk about it.
Good evening, gentlemen. It's good to see you again. How are you?
Good to see you. Reunited. We were in Ottawa together, and last time you were in Ottawa, you literally couldn't walk. Now you are fixed. You are repaired.
I'm so thrilled to be bipedal yet again. So thank you. And something else. I just wanted to thank you guys also for coming down to cover me at Bitcoin Miami. Along with Neil. I really appreciate it. That was very kind of you. So I was glad to see you. And this is the first time the three of us are speaking openly like this. And also, I just want to thank you for everybody who doesn't know, for you guys opening up your stream for me to start to feed, to do my live streams and my feeds to the National Telegraph, which I think is going to become far more valuable and informative as we get closer to the EMAC, the Emergency Measures Act Commission clown show that is going to be ensuing as of tomorrow. It's going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, that's a big story coming up. So thank you for coming on the TNT network, and we find a lot of what you have to say is very pertinent to, I think, the Canadian news consuming public wants to know sort of the inside story of the Freedom Convoy. And from you look at the list, it's going to be a bunch of liberals, and will they be questions? And then people like Patsy King, who's like going to be on there, and like what I can only assume what his mental state's going to be, and like this like I don't know if he's going to blame the whole thing on Mahmoud Ahmadinejad again, but so you're going to
maybe we should start from the beginning of why they're actually calling this inquiry and what the rules are and how it's kind of going to be going down, because you can honestly tell that the Liberals are extremely worried. I know it's the kind of the retired Supreme Court justice who's sort of managing this whole thing. I forget his name, something about it's something French, and I'm never going to learn French names on principle. But
good old Alberta boy, Wyatt
you
Claypool.
you can tell he might not be a liberal hack, but you can tell he's kind of stacked the people who are going to speak at this thing, maybe to make the Liberals more comfortable. So Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland will actually come and speak, and if they do speak, they'll actually answer some questions. But there's what is it, like 56 or 57 Liberal cabinet ministers, different local politicians and bureaucrats speaking. And then there's 9 actual Freedom Convoy people, some of which it's kind of questionable whether they actually should be talking like Pat King.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that like I didn't get standing in this commission for some very concerning reasons, but that's we'll deal with that in the future. So what I did was I submitted a late application for standing, myself and 2 other people who were on the original board. So 50% of the Freedom Convoy board members applied for standing together. And this justice decided that, well, it's not really pertinent to have them there. It's not really important. I don't know who these people are. Like, it's just, okay. So once I saw that, I'm like, all right, the guy watches the so-called media, CBC, and hasn't a clue what's going on. But it's okay. Well, I'll get him up to speed. I'll make sure of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's quite fascinating in how, and the sort of the original Freedom Convoy board and leadership has sort of been removed from the Freedom Convoy board and leadership, which is something I think, I mean, I'd like to get your views on it, because you are one of the founding members. You, Tamara, Chris Barber, and we'll say Bridget, sort of the first 4 in the Freedom Convoy. The story of the Freedom Convoy is these Chris Barber and Bridget are these 2 truckers in Alberta, and they're fed up with all the COVID nonsense. Tamara has a history of political organizing and political activism, so they ask her what to do. You and her are friends, know each other. You have a history of, political involvement. You also own a truck. You have arranged campaigns before, so she comes to you for advice, and then the 4 of you sort of start a GoFundMe plan to raise money to drive to Ottawa. And then the Freedom Convoy sort of grows from there. And there are also many different convoys. So the thing is, like, yeah, you started the idea, but then all these convoys came from Alberta, they came from Quebec, and they all converge on Parliament. So that's sort of the original 4. And then you have a board, which was however people. And then from my understanding is, like, almost all of the original board of the Freedom Convoy Corporation has been kicked out or removed or replaced in some way.
Yeah, so there's some mild inaccuracies in that's nuanced, but not really all that important. In general, you're in the right direction, but it actually started in British Columbia, of all places, okay. But there's no point wasting time in that. But in general, yeah, there was a Freedom Convoy board of 6 people, and of the 6 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think maybe 6 even, are no longer on the board. And I don't know who's in control of it. I'm told from the other board members that some lawyers who've been involved in this are controlling all the social media. They're controlling the board. They're controlling everything. So it's really quite concerning that whoever's on the board holds all the legal liability, but they aren't making any of the decisions. But I don't know the details now at this point, because I've been off that board for quite a while. Tamara's not on the board. Chris Barber's not on the board. Nobody is. It's kind of a mess from what I understand, which is why, when I saw friction already developing in March, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go in my own direction. As Daniel and Wyatt, I was speaking at Bitcoin Miami. I have my own following and my own people. It was my media strategy that I used from the Freedom Convoy. So I knew it would be better use to take my efforts, put together this book that I've been working on, which we'll discuss later, and focus on getting that out around the time that there would be a commission, investigation, inquiry, whatever it was going to be. We all knew that something was going to have to materialize at some point, which is exactly what I've been waiting for and killing time in Twitter Spaces since then, and doing speaking engagements.
maybe you should go back too, because I wouldn't want to just assume the audience knows this, because I think when people hear media strategy, they just kind of hear generally, we're going to talk to these people, we're going to talk to those people, and we're going to advertise ourselves. I think it's good that you actually maybe explain your specific approach to the media strategy so people understand why, to a certain extent, the Freedom Convoy did as well as it did, considering the massive amount of people and the massive chaotic kind of media scene around it, and how it was able to essentially, stay running for over 3 weeks.
Yeah, so there is an entire chapter on my media strategy and explaining it in the book, chapter 11, if I remember correctly. Yes, chapter 11. So I go into it in detail and kind of lay it out. But in general, the elevator version of this is essentially, because I've been operating in alternative media for several years, producing podcasts, knowing podcasters. I've met a few very, very famous YouTubers. My ex was a pretty well-known YouTuber as well. So I've been swimming in this space for quite a while. And I knew how to take an effective approach media-wise, because I also have a background in marketing and communications, which I don't talk about very often, but I used to work in the field, not formally trained, but learned on the job in the corporate world many years ago. So I knew I could take those skill sets, that talent stack, put them together and come up with what I call the media strategy for the new world, where we ignore the so-called media, the legacy media, and focus on alternative media and make sure we're able to get our message out there the way we wanted it. And there would be no ambiguity in terms of what our goals were. So that's why I banned the Toronto Star, the CBC, Punchy McGregor for CTV, banned them all from our press conferences and focused on bringing in the National Telegraph, the Post Millennial, Epoch Times, even Rebel. There was a bunch of independent media creators themselves that were there on the ground. And I mean, Daniel, you were reporting there. You saw the room was packed each time. Kean Bexley was
millions
there.
of views, yeah. And one of my favorite moments of all time is Glenn McGregor throwing a hissy fit outside the hotel room, and then a literal Muslim Iranian refugee, our friend Salman Sina, comes out and just starts yelling at him. You're fake news. You're harassing us. You're a regime journalist. I dealt with this before.
And the thing is, I don't think you can overlook, because I think a lot of people would think, oh, well, if you want your message to get out there, you should be having the legacy media come in because they're so big and they broadcast to so many people. But I think right after the first press conference, you pointed out, they come in with these artillery piece-sized cameras, and they put them in the room, and they actually block out other people.
It literally happened to us. So, when
the legacy media shows up, it actively cuts the amount of people who can report on the event.
That's right.
So I could tell you what it was like so those original press conferences, where it was just alternative media, great, huge audiences, everyone watched them. You guys did over a couple hours where you would answer whatever questions the journalists asked you, and it was and everyone got to ask their questions in a respectful manner. But yeah, we did then people, you kind of got overruled at one point, and they thought let's have a press conference. We'll keep it small. It'll be Tamara and it'll be Brian Peckford, and they'll go out and they'll have a thing and they'll be very controlled. And they made a statement, right? The two of them there. But the preamble of that is again, the alternative media sort of set up, we had set up our sticks, and then they come in with, again, these massive artillery pieces. And they push out, and then they have people have to organize and okay, fine, big cameras in front, and then I, who got in a good spot, had to be moved back to whatever, right? Because I could do it within a few whatever. But then as soon as Tamara has a hesitation, Glenn McGregor starts yelling about guns. There's guns in the clouds. You have guns here. How many guns are you planning to kill everyone? Why are you going to kill everyone? And it's this is why you're not allowed, because you're it was this is why Ben was right. It instantly devolved. You let the mainstream media in, and it instantly devolved into chaos.
And I did have a follow-up with some of them who came up after that press conference. I didn't know what was going on. I flipped out when I found out it was happening, and I saw what happened online. And then they all, but not all of them, a number of them came up to my hotel room, because, as you know, I was in a wheelchair with my leg up in the air. It's not much I could do. And they walked in. They saw me sit there saying, "So how'd it go?"
Yeah,
I told you. You didn't listen to me, and I told you. So now they're going to start spinning some sort of narrative about guns, and it's all BS. Listen to me next time. And I think that kind
The
of
other thing
helped
you
with that a
point out-
little bit.
The other thing you pointed out on Twitter Space is like the licensing. The reason they could spin that and not the other press conferences because they like media licensing of footage and whatever. It's expensive,
That's right.
so they needed they needed their own physical shots of Tamara to lie about her. Right? If you kept them out of the room,
That's right.
they couldn't.
And
film
if you notice, whenever the so-called media talks about the Freedom Convoy and Tamara Leach, they only have one set of B-roll, and that's when she was giving that one press conference. Another one, when I told them not. Oh, sorry, it was that one. It was that one, and I told them don't have the press conference, and they did. And well, that's the only footage they have. So now, anytime they want to smear Tamara Leach, they have some stock footage that they use, and I was trying to prevent that.
Also, what you guys ended up doing in the sort of free-flowing press conferences where you'd have all the independent media, and they could ask questions for 2 hours if they wanted to.
2.5 hours was our first press conference, yeah.
Yeah, there was never a little bit of ambiguity where someone could pretend that you said something that you didn't say, because you would discuss it and you would break it down for so long. The media couldn't say, oh, well, here's what Tamara Leach or Chris Barber or Ben said, and they cut out 10 words that make you look bad, because the thing went on so long. They would be opening themselves up for a major lawsuit if they tried to take you out of context, because every single bit of context was there. Whereas, again, when Glenn McGregor starts screaming at the back of a press conference, or it's artificially shortened because the media is only going to cover it for so long, it tightens the amount of words that you can use and tightens the context that you're allowed to give, which means immediately they can kind of spin it as, oh, well, they walked out of the room as soon as we start yelling about guns, so there might be something there. It's like, no. You were acting rude and they left the room, and that's why they should have never let you in, because now you can kind of make that a narrative. It's to a certain extent a game. It's not just sort of a political battle. You have to realize how the game's played and be able to play it well if you want to get through it. And maybe we can go on to the inquiry.
Just to add on to that, the entire Freedom Convoy was a game. It was all chess, and it was important for us, especially from a media strategy, to be 5 steps ahead of what the opposition, if you call them, was doing. The only problem was we had people that were embedded with the Freedom Convoy that we don't know whose side they were. Now, luckily, putting together the book required us to go through all of the events, and we can finally figure out how everything fits together. But in the moment, I mean, Daniel, you saw some of the press conferences. You were around some of what was going on there. You saw it was constant chaos. It was problem after problem and issue after issue, putting out fire after fire. And every time a fire was done, it's like, okay, great. We got to go on GB News or Newsmax or whatever media was lined up for the day. And it really never stopped.
And a lot of opportunists who like
a lot of egos, a lot of egos there.
A lot of people. I mean, I could see this really quickly, and this is where like my background in stand-up comedy helped me here. It's not so
Wyatt, I'm drinking out of a Christmas cup for you, buddy.
There you go.
Okay.
Have a Nagila.
Happy Sukkot. Yeah.
I know. So the way I could tell it, like I can tell this though, like it's people who, in my view, I call it microphone drunk. And you notice this when some people start comedy and they get the first bit of good and like they get like laughter from a crowd and like get the highs. And there's some people just like love public speaking, can do really well in it. But then there's like some people who like can't handle that, like, because there's a reason why people are terrified of speaking in front of crowds, because like the hatred of a vast group of people, like a social media mob, is terrifying to human beings. But in the same token, like the adoration of hundreds of people, thousands of people more at the same time can break someone the other way. And like you can see that people might have come in with like whatever neutral intentions, like I'm just going to be here behind the scenes type people, and then they get in front of the camera their first time, and they get all the comments and they see their name, and then boom, like they're just microphone drunk, and
every single time you then see them speak, they're almost saying something different because they want that crowd approval, which means that the entire message that they're trying to push over time just becomes a muddled mess. And that's kind of what the inquiry, in a certain sense, as a tool can actually do well with, is it almost kind of, with certain people, you can kind of solidify what actually happened at the Freedom Convoy in this small bite-sized moment for the general public. But maybe moving on to the commission itself, the inquiry, What do you, Ben, because since you're going to be a speaker at it, do you think that the Liberal strategy going into this thing is, with their massive amount of speakers, going from everyone from the mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson, Peter Slowly, the former Ottawa police police chief, you have Chrystia Freeland, you have Justin Trudeau speaking. What do you think is going to be the general Liberal strategy going into this in terms of trying to, protect themselves from, public scrutiny? Because no one's getting convicted after this inquiry, but it's more so the political implications are what, to a certain extent, really scares the Liberals.
I think it's going to be pretty simple. I mean, extremists can only look at the world from their own view, and they don't understand other worldviews, and they always double down. That's what we knew. We could predict them so easily in Ottawa, how they would behave. So it's going to be racist, bigot, misogynist, homophobe, Islamophobe. That's it, over and over again. Just that white supremacy. And I don't know if I got everything in the stack. I might have missed one of the words, one of the smear words. They're going to try. I think they're going to try that. And
they
maybe
might try anti-Semitism on.
Yes, exactly. I think they're going to. So they'll double down on that strategy. But what's really funny is when I saw the leaked list of 65 people, and of which 56 of them are government employees. 56.
Yeah.
I smell desperation. They're desperate. They are in so much trouble. Real trouble. They violated Canadian constitutional law. They froze people's bank accounts, their assets, ability to function in society. That is a human rights violation in the modern era when somebody can't buy medicine or food. They were trying to starve us. I don't think the Ayatollahs in Iran would be that bad, to be entirely honest. They are in.
Well, I mean, the thing here, I'll call it like the Ayatollah. The Ayatollahs in Iran are worse than Trudeau, but what they would never do. But what they never do. The point I always make, though, what the Ayatollahs would never be crazy enough to do, and what the Chinese would never be able to do, is unilaterally seize people's bank accounts, because that's a death knell. Because one of the things that you have to have for totalitarian regimes to survive is everyone to kind of know that they can launder money safely in and out of your country in a weird way. That once you start like taking people's money and they realize, oh, the money isn't safe here, that's when everyone knows, okay, the game is up. And the game for everyone with assets in the country, the game is now get the assets out of the country because the jig is up. So even the Chinese and the Iranians, like, yes, they'll murder you. They'll murder people. They'll arbitrarily detain you. You'll have a show trial and they'll kill you and your family. But they're very, very resident about unilaterally freezing bank accounts, because that's the signal to everyone that, okay, jig is up, money out of the country because it's over. And Trudeau did that. He this is like, it's so crazy. Like the slippery slope is like, well, if we start by, vilifying people and breaking the law, you get to the point where the government just takes your money away. And like, we didn't start at the beginning of the slope. We literally started at the bottom of the slide. Like, it's literally where Trudeau started. It's fascinating that.
Well, and also this brilliant strategy by him and the finance minister. Christian, my grandfather, was an actual Nazi freeland. They caused somewhere between 1.2 and 1.4 trillion dollars in capital flight within a week. Like, that is an amazing accomplishment of torpedoing your own economy. Like, just astounding. And that's why so many people in the finance industry are out for their heads. Like, that's the sort of damage this sort of stupidity causes. And, in this commission, they're now going to have to justify it. So what are they going to do? So they bring in 56 government employees. Now, it's something very important to understand with government employees. And Daniel, I know you know people who work in the government. Wyatt, I'm assuming you do too. Especially where they work in the government, it can vary and be even worse. But, I mean, most people work for the government. If you do not toe a political narrative, if there is one, then you open yourself up to being reprimanded or demoted or passed up for promotion moving forward. So how many of those people are working for the government are going to be honest and risk their career to be what they perceive as a whistleblower? We call it telling the truth. They call it being a whistleblower. That's how comical Canada has become and what they've done to the country. But I am somewhat optimistic, cautiously optimistic, because we saw the CSIS memo that was reported on, I believe, by True North, if I'm not mistaken. that they rejected Trudeau's swastika narrative. It's like, yeah, the spokesperson was a Jew. They probably weren't Nazis, like the most obvious thing in the world.
It's also just absurd how quickly someone will take literally one flag and then just pretend like all 80,000 people in Ottawa right now probably agree with that guy. Like,
a flag out of context. What was the context of the flag? Was the flag to actually say that's what Justin Trudeau is? Because I'll tell you something, a little story. The first day that I was there, on the first weekend, right next to the stage on Parliament Hill, I saw a woman holding a yellow sign, and she had a marker with a swastika in it. And I couldn't see the writing on it, so I went up closer to her, and I went to go talk to her. And what it was it was the swastika written over the COVID, an image of the COVID app, and an equal sign, and a yellow Star of David. And I went to speak to her, and I said, so tell me about your sign. And she said, oh, we've seen this before, because Justin Trudeau is doing exactly to Canadians and truckers today to what they did to my ancestors in Germany in the 1930s, because I'm a religious Jew. She was Hasidic. So, context is everything. And it's amazing how the radical left, or the people like, I don't know, what's that guy's name? Bernie Farber? Like, oh, it's a Nazi flag. Yeah. They're talking about you, They're talking about the underlying philosophy of these people that they were upset at. But, the radical left, that's what they do. Remove all context, ban anybody's ability to speak and respond through censorship, and insert our own projection. And they're going to struggle to do that in this commission, I guarantee you, because I know I'm not going to allow it.
Yeah,
I was going to say quickly, I find it endlessly hilarious how after the Freedom Convoy, after Bernie Farber and the Anti-Hate Network were shown to be literally making up fake instances of hate during the Freedom Convoy because they had none, was still being referenced by all the media as anti-hate experts. I love how you can just call yourself something and the media will contact you as an expert in that. Like you could just call yourself like, oh, I'm a foreign policy expert because I'm from the foreign policy expert. I'm from foreignpolicyexpert.com. Like that's how dumb the media is. If you just simply label your website something,
Wyatt. So-called media.
Media.
The legacy media.
Yeah, I think this media line really illustrates what and I think COVID really brought to everyone's attention the problems with what you could call globalism, or like the technocratic elite, and how the media, the government, and the big corporations, big tech, work in tandem to sort of push their narrative through technocracy, right? And experts, as we see. So it's because you make a lie, it serves a narrative, right? So you have anti-hate experts, which get millions of dollars a year of funding from the government. That gives them an expert label. They got to go in the media. So when the Terry Fox statue was desecrated, so someone put a sign on the Terry Fox statue, never mind that this was done a couple weeks later and they decked him out in gay propaganda, which fine, it's not desecrating the statue, right? But you bring in experts to repeat a message a lot on officially trusted channels in the media, and it pushes a narrative that aligns with governments and sort of corporate interests. So then you have this thing that's just bombarded at people over and over and over again, and then it becomes you trust the experts. And if you're not trusting the experts, well, then you're spreading disinformation, and this has to be combated by the government, which needs more power. Which is then we see this over and over. And
I saw one instance so ridiculous where they said that this, the reporter from Global News said, well, this seems sort of hateful, and then they're like, this seems sort of hateful. So I brought in an anti-hate expert, and they said, I have no evidence that this is actually hateful, but I also think this seems a little bit hateful. I'm like, what kind of journalism is this? It's just.
I love every anti-hate expert in the media is this person researches online hatred. And it links to trends within the algorithm that we've noticed that lead people from so Ben Dichter wore socks today, and those socks matched. Pol Pot also wore matching socks when he
therefore matching socks are racist.
Cambodia, which means he's Pol Pot. But also communism is good. This is every anti-hate expert online is I've studied trends in social media at Diversity Studies University.
I was blocked by the anti-hate network on Twitter, which isn't a surprise because I think like 80% of the population of Canada is. I was blocked by them after pointing out that people who work for Press Progress, another left-wing hacky publication, that they were actively promoting like assaulting people they don't like and saying that screw veterans, go and celebrate the October Revolution in Russia. And it's like instead of Remembrance Day, and like these people are supposed to be like the people reporting on hatred in the Conservative Party, and they don't give a crap when one of their favorite publications has people who are clearly extremely hateful and pro-communist.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, I personally don't pay much attention to these useless organizations. It's a bunch of communists trying to milk the government for money. I don't really care what they think. They're completely useless. And the so-called anti-hate people, along with the so-called media, they're completely irrelevant to me. I think are they going to be testifying in the commission?
I was about to say I would have loved it if Bernie Farber had to show up and talk about it, because Bernie Farber is great at putting up tweets. He's not good at actually coherently talking for more than 20 seconds.
He's as relevant as a tick, so I don't really care about him.
I saw an old. I want to get people's questions in the chat. Direct. So if you want to ask Ben a question in the chat as he's going to the hearing, I got this from Jordan from a while ago. So if you're still here from, I think this is from about 20 minutes ago. He says, how does it feel seeing protests all over Europe that were probably inspired by the Canadian Freedom Convoy? So the current protests in Europe over the energy crisis, how does, and probably, I guess we'll throw the farmer protests in there too, but how does it feel as like a Freedom Convoy organizer to see your work be applied all over other Western nations?
I mean, it feels good to see that people have finally decided to stand up and push back. Whether, myself or all of us can take credit for it, like, I don't know. Jordan Peterson seemed to think so when I was talking to him about it recently, and was quite complimentary to it. I mean, for me, it was just, you had seen when you would come into my rooms in the morning, like it was just constant work. It never stopped, and I wasn't. I was just focused on the goal of, we need to end the mandates and we need to end the ArriveCAN app and allow people to get their lives back. I just hope they're all successful. And if there's any way that I or we can help them, we're there for them. And we all need to stick together and just protect everybody who's fighting for just basic freedoms, or just say advocating. I mean, that's what it's not. We're going the military and coming over the grassy knoll and fighting. It's just, being able to stand up and push back. It feels, I can't believe it. It's almost like a dream to be honest, to see that, like during the convoy, when there were 30 or 40 other countries that were doing convoys, and my friends in Latin America were sending me videos from Latin America of convoys in Mexico, Bolivia, I think Colombia too, and it was just, I don't know. It was amazing to see that. Not just the effectiveness. Like, I learned something really important during this, and this is where Daniel calls me hippity dippity. But seriously, the power, not the power, but the effect you can have on people when you get them to focus on the good and the positive things in life, on those 4 pillars that I wanted to be the messaging of the Freedom Convoy: peace, love, unity, and freedom. And Mike, who's doing the promo video for the book, took 6 days worth of footage, and he was in the car. We were cutting some promo videos this weekend, doing some recording, and he was showing me some of the footage, and I just saw person after person after person on the street freezing their rear end off in the streets of Ottawa, just saying peace, love, unity, and freedom. It was amazing. That part felt so good. And because, listen,
I'll transition you into that book.
No, but hold on. And this is important. This is important because, remember, like, truckers can be rough around the edges. I know a lot of truckers, and they're not like me. They didn't come from the corporate world and go into trucking. They've been in this for decades, and they're tough people, and they don't take crap. That's why they went to protest, because they had had enough. And, because they are so strong, they are not afraid of a fight and to push back. But to get them out of that state of anxiety and to focus on life is good, man, peace, love, unity, and freedom. And they did it all the way through, even to the last day, the last days when the police were kettling them. They said, you saw it as well on those videos. They said to the police who are lined up in front of them, they said, we love you, man. We're all Canadian. This is peace, love, and we know you don't want to be here, but we love you. And that was truly amazing, and that's something that's changed my life.
Yeah, I'll before I transition to the book, I'll say my experience there, because I was sort of filming the last stand of as the Freedom Convoy as they're getting beaten off Wellington Street, and like I'll always have the image of like I think Wellington and Bank, where you have protesters literally standing on the last snowbank, and the riot police just lined up, and they're just there, like everyone's yelling like no violence, no violence, and they just start singing the Canadian national anthem.
That's right.
And then they pepper spray the crowd. The police would grab one person who falls behind, drag him, beat him up, throw him back, and then people would get pulled out. And like it was these like, sort of saddening but also inspiring moments of like people had just been pepper sprayed coming back, and then like bloodshot eyes, just start singing the national anthem in sort of like peaceful defiance of all the absurdity going on around them.
That's right.
And as like the police force with the names and the logos all ripped off. And like the other thing you saw, like the difference between alternative media and mainstream media there, like Alexa from Rebel got shot in the leg.
Yeah.
I was there, Post Millennial there. We were behind the protesters, like trying to duck in, get footage and avoid the pepper spray. And you saw the mainstream media got behind all these blockades with their fancy things. They're watching go on. They're drinking coffee. They're not doing anything. And then when they see someone get dragged behind, they start filming after he's been beaten to just get footage of him being dragged out. So you could you saw the mainstream media footage covered later, like 71 arrests, 72 arrested, 73 arrested.
It's
right?
ridiculous that they just associate someone being arrested with them doing something wrong, while these legacy media places tend to be of the radical crime reform bent, in which they think that someone actively murdering someone should be let out of prison right away because bail is so oppressive.
Yeah, it's a complete like, so no morals or values to these companies, right? Everyone's innocent. Everyone in jail is a product of racism until the Freedom Convoy comes, and then they're the thin blue line all of a sudden, and like every cop arrest isn't doing enough. There should be 10 arrests and shoot to kill. Like we want a shoot to kill order on the protesters.
Remember, there was actively a poll that came out that was like, to be fair, I think the polls are a little bit skewed because they sort of made the Freedom Convoy out to be a menace in the poll.
Are you saying the polling industry is as dishonest as the so-called media? Shut up,
but
Wyatt.
I want to take this little nugget out of the polls that we saw. Remember that insane poll where it was like showing like 45% of people were okay with like deadly force to remove people from the protest because they were like, I'm okay with force or more than force, like more than like whatever to do it. Like, what do you want? Like Tiananmen Square tanks rolling through? Like,
that's right. Those are your tolerant lefties.
I would assume the polls are skewed up a little bit, but even the fact that like as little as like even 20% of people believing that the government should send in the military is insane. But it's just that there's so many people who have this weird dear leader syndrome where if the leader of their party tells them that they're going to do something, that it must be good. And that's maybe I want to get into the inquiry a bit here because I was on Richard Serrett's show, Saga 960, good show. You should watch it, especially if you're in Ontario.
I like Richard.
Yeah, Richard's great.
Both him and Mark, I like,
Yeah, shout out to him and Mark for bringing us on their show and supporting alternative media.
Yeah, Mark Petroni and Richard Serrett are kind of like classic talk show, like political talk show radio hosts, if they would take that as a compliment. Sure. But what I was telling Richard today was what I think is going to be the big thing for Justin Trudeau. And yes, there's not going to be literal legal consequences coming out of the inquiry where you're like Justin Trudeau is going to have this cuff slapped on him and walked off stage. That's clearly not going to happen. But what's worse for the Liberals is if their poll numbers slump and they stay slumped after the inquiry, after people get a really good look for the kind of contempt that Justin Trudeau has for the typical Canadian. And I think what's going to hurt him badly here, in such a way that it didn't hurt him during the We Charity scandal or the SNC scandal, is this scandal is very personal to people. Like, even though the media overcomplicates it, the SNC scandal and the We Charity scandal are a little bit more complex. Justin Trudeau can have a slight bit of plausible deniability. He can throw other people under the bus for it. But in this one, he cannot distance himself from the fact that he was the one who called for the Emergencies Act, and he was the one who implemented it. And at the same time, it's also a very personal scandal because in SNC and the We Charity scandal, he didn't run over your grandmother with a horse. In this one, he kind of did.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also, even his father, when he had invoked the War Measures Act, was heavily criticized for it. And I remember learning about Trudeau in school in grade 7, I think it was, grade 7, grade 8. I had a teacher that was obsessed with Trudeau in a positive way, but even she had a very negative impression of him because of that one specific issue. And that stuck with people. Canadians don't like violence. That's just not who we are. We are a peaceful country. We leave it to the Americans. God bless them. Those guys love to fight. But we usually just sit back and, drink our beer while they do all the fighting sort of thing. So I don't think it matters where you are on the political spectrum. This was completely unacceptable. And then further exacerbated by the fact that he froze everybody's bank accounts without the legal justification to do that. I was not charged with any crime, but I had everything: bank accounts, credit cards, business accounts, lines of credit, everything. Nothing worked. And guess what? You're next. If he gets away with this, you are next. And it doesn't matter if you are liberal or conservative or whatever, because Krista Freehand's tools are going to be available to the next administration who might have differing political views of you. That's the can of worms that Prime Minister Blackface has opened. And I think that's why there's people, even in his own team, who've reached out to me, who have told me they've had it with him. They've had enough.
And you mean Trudeau's team, right?
I mean liberals, people who are historically liberal voters. I've spoken to people who used to be in government under the Liberals prior to Trudeau, it's nice to see there's some strength and courage starting to flourish within. There's the seeds that are being planted of people within the Liberal Party that want to go back to being liberal and away from this progressive cult, because they realize they're not welcome in it, and it is toxic and destroying the country. So I think we're going to see an end to, when we see an end to the blackface years, I think we're going to see an end to that type of politics, which is good for conservatives. You know why? Because that will force the Conservative Party to go back to being conservative and not have this push-pull behind the scenes of let's be conservative. No, let's be liberal light. It's like, no. You go over there, be conservative. You go over there, be liberal, and the NDP be whatever the NDP is. And that's it.
That is.
That's right. Well, yeah. They should discover too. Listen, the NDP's got to go back to workers' rights and elderly people. That's it. That's what they should be. That's their natural home ground. So they get rid of, Jack Mead. Hopefully that's where they'll go. I'm not all that optimistic, but hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, optimist is right here. Karen also asked a good question of does anyone know the impact? So I know TD lost $4 billion of market share during the Emergencies Act with banking unfreeze to when it was ended. And we estimate that about $1.2 trillion of capital left the country.
And that doesn't mean it didn't come back, but the whole point is $1.4 trillion that was being held in Canada in one way or another was kind of moved elsewhere because people were terrified if somehow their accounts were going to be frozen for no reason and then seized.
Yeah. So
because remember, most people are not politically engaged, right? I was in Ottawa until March the 12th, and I was in an area that there's a very large elderly community, retired community in that area. And we heard from, because I was staying with somebody, we heard from people at the bank, that from the tellers that my friend was friends with, that they've never seen so many elderly people coming in every day trying to withdraw the maximum amount of money, coming in to withdraw 9,000 and change every day, because they don't really know about government. They don't know much about, maybe they voted for Trudeau, but they do remember their parents during the Depression, and when they couldn't get access to their money, and they're like, okay, I'm going to just put it under my mattress. So that's where most of the 1.2 to 1.4 trillion dollars went, as well as a number of VIP people. And I know of a couple of them by name who just decided, I'm done. I'm moving all my assets out of Canada, and set up stuff offshore, set up a corporation in ABC country, and started moving all their money out.
And these people don't even have to be scared that their own assets are going to be frozen. They just have to be like, well, if I'm trying to do business in Canada, and then suddenly one person on the 20-person chain of people I rely on for my business, or I transact with, suddenly gets their thing shut down, I'm effectively shut down too, in a way. So the whole point is that if the government's just going to start plucking people out of the supply chain and saying this person's no longer allowed to participate in the economy, it just wrecks the entire economy. You don't need to burn every single bridge before the economy slows to a halt. It just needs to be a few bridges here and there.
And I think what you've outlined is the key blind spot of the totalitarian mind. Is the totalitarian is under the impression, almost every totalitarian is a social constructionist, which means they think that if they shape the system, people will come into agreement, because they don't believe in really personal agency. But they don't understand that even the people who disagree with you on individual, entire systems have to incorporate everyone. You can't just have all the good people under one system and have none of the bad. That's just not feasible. But the totalitarian mind thinks that they can create a system which either forces everyone to be the perfect person, or they can get rid of all the bad people, and it will only make everything better because they are not of the good mindset.
They live in a majority rules kind of mindset. And when I say majority rules, I mean in a toxic sense, that they think if they can get most people on a program, that means it's been successful. It's what led to the ridiculous thinking from the Liberals during the Freedom Convoy that, the unvaccinated truckers only represent 12% of truckers. Do you think that that we have the number of truckers we do just for the fun of it? That we just have an extra,
Exactly.
50% of them are just sort of arbitrary. They're moving around plastic pieces, fake dog poo in their trucks. That's all they're doing.
Exactly.
These people are kind of needed to get food to small towns and whatnot. We can't just say, get rid of 30% of them. And that's what dictatorships do all the time. They're like, well, 5% of the country is a bunch of rightists, so let's get rid of them and hopefully we don't starve to death.
No, that's right.
Take the farms. I mean, it's also thinking of the fertilizer banning of whatever. It's the farmers don't know how to farm. We in Ottawa know how to farm.
Exactly.
Honestly, we could go down the line.
Farming laws. And what could go wrong?
I guarantee we could go down the line with this. You don't need that extra 30% of fertilizer that you use in order to grow your crops. You've been doing it wrong this entire time. Don't you know that you can grow the exact same amount of food with less fertilizer because Chrystia Freeland says so? And
of course. Who do you think knows more about farming? Omar Al-Ghabra or some silly farmer who spends all his day walking around in the dirt? Ew.
Yeah.
Ew.
Omar Al-Ghabra thinks that we can fertilize the ground with the bodies of his enemies.
Yeah.
So okay, let's ask you about. So you got a book coming out later this month. Book launch is the 26th.
Did you put the title out yet? I'm not sure because I barely pay attention.
Yes, I did. The title of the book, unsurprising to a lot of people, which we announced in a space this weekend, is Honking for Freedom. And, the premise of the title of the book, I knew from the very get-go what we would title it, because I do remember, and I'm sure, Daniel, you went through this experience as well, being in the hotel room, and there was no honking after the first couple of days, it had ended. And then somewhere mid the second week, all of a sudden, I would hear, we were starting to get a little anxious because the police apparently were threatening to raid. I'm not sure how true that was now in retrospect, but we were being told that the police were threatening to be raided. And you would hear, and I tell this story in the book in a kind of funny way that you guys will understand, but you would hear the odd honk just out of nowhere. And then 2 minutes later, honk, honk. And then another very slight, not very loud, but because distant, another honk 30 seconds later. And I think, God, I hope that's not truckers being raided by the police, being dragged out of their trucks. And I growing up, I always, we learn the lessons of the Holocaust, and we hear all the stories of the Holocaust, and that is really exactly how the Canadian police forces were operating. And it was just a very grim couple of evenings when that would happen. And the other thing is that our political class is so dumb and so unaware of what's going on around them that they didn't understand. They try to. It's so funny. They're in power, running the country, yet they try to pull out the victim card. Excuse me, you're in charge. You're not. You can't be the victim when you're in charge of everything. It's clown world. But they failed to understand a couple of very basic premises. One is the honking was the protest. That was them trying to speak. That was them giving a cry out to the government to say, you're ruining my life, and you've ruined the lives of those around me. Please stop and bring us back to normal. And they were the political class has their heads so far up their own rear end that they couldn't see what was so painfully obvious right in front of them, including the so-called media, the CBC, who was complaining about trucks, but couldn't put the pieces together to figure out why the truckers were upset. Go outside. They were parked right in front of your office, right in front of the CBC's office. They could have gone outside with a camera and knocked on the door and say, can I ask you why you're here? But no, zero intellectual curiosity from anyone in the so-called media.
Yeah, and the lack of curiosity is so, I don't want to say I guess indicative of the state of modern media, and shown where it's progressed in decades. Because in the 1950s, if something happened that even liberal left-leaning journalists would want to know what's going on, would want to get to the truth in some way.
Well, people used to have pride in actually uncovering details about a story. Now people are angry if you uncover details of a story.
Yeah, and that's why alternative media did so well. Is we would just go there and we just do live. I would just live stream until my phone died or because it got too cold out. And yeah, sometimes you talk to people in the street, and they're there because George Soros and the globalists or whatever, and they got 8,000 conspiracies and they're all connected, and it's not very well thought out or through line together, and the vaccine's all part of it, and fine. But most people, especially the people in the trucks, are no, it's too much. They're just not going to stop. It's either we do this or this goes on forever. This is about getting our lives back. It's people are losing their jobs. The supply chain's breaking down. This has to stop, and we're here to stop this. And you're
I think two things that we should note too about the freedom convoy that we've overlooked so far, because I think you just reminded me of Daniel, just how cold it was, considering how many people were there. I guarantee you that you could probably put that in the Guinness Book of World Records for the coldest protest that's ever happened. People were even saying the people have a hard time protesting multiple days in countries where it's pleasant outside, and that was -30 on some days. And then the other thing I want to bring up, just because we haven't connected it back, I don't think people recognize the fact that without the Freedom Convoy, and it's sort of the message that people kind of, it goes under the radar a little bit, that we'd probably still have the Arrive Can app if it wasn't for the Freedom Convoy and for like Ben going on Tucker Carlson's show and actually making that one of the key issues, because so often all the little technicalities like the Arrive Can app would just be kind of generally considered part of the minutia of COVID restrictions rather than actually one of the most aggressively authoritarian aspects of it, which is the ability to track people on their phones just to verify some nonsensical vaccine requirement.
I will go on and say that I said this after the convoy and during the convoy. One of the key things that the truckers did is, if you look at the rhetoric, before the convoy in mid-January, Doug Ford was saying, and the science was very clear, guys, the science, trademark the Theresa Tam Corporation, the science was very clear. We need to upgrade the vaccine passport to include booster shots. It will be unsafe for people like me who only got 2 COVID vaccines to go into a grocery store or a restaurant with only 2 COVID shots. The science is very clear. And then the convoy rolled into town, and then they honked, and people made their voices heard. And then the science, trademark Fauci Industries, became very, very clear in mid-February that actually, you know what? We don't really need the booster, the transmission, whatever.
It's funny. It's funny how that changed, isn't it? Yeah.
The vaccine passport isn't actually that effective. We don't actually need vaccine passports anymore. And then Doug Ford started to make some libertarian noises. And now he still did seize everyone's bank accounts and act like an authoritarian dictator.
Those
but
noises might have just been a burp.
Make some libertarian noises for the first time since 2018.
But here, what was I thinking? Oh, here's another thing. And I don't think anyone ever followed up on this because there's just so much going on. Where was the giant COVID outbreak among the Freedom Convoy?
Yeah, super spreader. What happened?
I thought everyone was supposed to be dead by now. Everyone must be zombies because they died so many times from the crazy COVID risk of being at the protest.
Again, it was the middle of February. Okay, you'll never see leftists out on the street if it's not the summertime in Canada. The left is completely dormant from November.
That's why the counter protest barely got off the ground.
Yeah, November to April, there is no left-wing movement, right? So you had dead cold, right? Just freezing our asses off out there. And it was me covering it, and I was around pretty much all of Canada's least vaccinated people, and they were hugging. No one was wearing masks. We were going inside, huddling in close quarters for warmth, and people were there sharing joints and smoking weed together, not everyone was, but I'm just saying you saw that going on. It was a love fest. This is Canada after all. The rhetoric of why we still needed all these government measures was, if you guys do this, Ottawa will collapse. The hospitals will be full. Bodies will be leaving the streets of Wellington. You'll be leaving Wellington in body bags. Not one single person in the convoy died from COVID. Not one, hospitals were completely fine. So the entire rhetoric was, guys, the reason you can't have a Freedom Convoy, because it's the Freedom Convoy in February of 2022, everyone's going to die. How many? Not only
did not everybody die, people met each other, formed relationships. People started dating. I know of 2 people at least who are now about to have children. That was a result of the Freedom Convoy. That was an act committed during the convoy itself. There's so many beautiful things that come together when people remove those ridiculous face diapers and start being people again. Because remember, before the convoy, people were worried about going out without a mask. And then here we show up in Ottawa and nobody's wearing a mask. And Quebec truckers are hugging Alberta truckers. And I said to my friend, what is going on here? This is something new I've never seen before in my life. It was amazing.
It was also difficult for the media to sneak up on people because they were the only ones wearing the masks. So it was really easy to point them out on the streets.
That's right.
Yeah, I met a nice reporter from France, France 2 or France 4 or whatever. She had come into her place or whatever. And I checked on her later, and she was and they got some good footage. She's been nice to people. I said you'll be fine. Everyone's really nice. Just don't wear a mask outside and berate people, and they'll be more than happy to talk to you. And she's like, okay, good advice. Then she went on the street, and how was it? She's like, oh yeah, everyone was very nice. And apparently she was being nice to people, just asking them questions, and they were respectful. And that's mainstream media. It's mainstream media in France. So it didn't have the CTV logo. It made everyone mad. But it's just like, if you're outside wearing a mask, people are going to be like, okay, this person has an agenda. But it's like, if you don't,
there's
because
something onto that. I think the second or third interview I did once we got into Ottawa was with a girl who is a reporter for, I want to say I-24, but I might be incorrect, for French media, and she was from Quebec. She's a Quebecer, but she works for French media in France. And she wanted to interview me, find out what's happening with the Freedom Convoy, like everybody else. Okay, so we did an interview. And I said to her at the end of the interview, once we finished, and, I always talk for a couple minutes, what'd you think, all that sort of stuff. And she said to me, before the Freedom Convoy, I was a separatist my whole life. And once I saw the Freedom Convoy starting, the whole idea, and I saw all the pictures of the people on the side of the road and that everybody's coming together, I went and bought my first ever Canadian flag, and I'm no longer a separatist. That's what we did. And that's what happens when the media and the the so-called media and the politicians get out of the way. We all come together and unify and embrace our differences in culture and don't use it against each other, right? We accept one another. So that's the reality of it.
So I just wanted to bring up one more topic maybe before we sort of end the stream, since we're already past the hour mark here, which is usually when we try and wrap it up.
Well, before you bring up that topic, let me just announce a couple of things. So you asked about the title of the book. The title of the book is Honking for Freedom. The pre-sale is going to be available on October 21st. There will be a website you'll be able to go to and decide which platform you're going to buy it on, and you can pre-sale it there. Then we're having a launch party that I've invited Mr. Daniel Bordman to participate in. Wyatt, I don't know if you're going to be in town, but it would be great. We're going to be having independent media there, so it'd be great to have the National Telegraph there as well, reporting on it. And a little bit of a kernel, which is the endorsement on the back of the book, was written by a gentleman by the name of Jordan B. Peterson, who read. I sent him I sent him a couple of chapters, and I sent him the entire manuscript, and I think he liked it, and so he gave us our blurb / endorsement, which we're printing on the book, and I'm eternally grateful for him for that. So I think people will enjoy the book.
Yeah, and it's the launch party is in Toronto. It's at a bar on the Danforth. Do you want to say the location or?
No, because we're going to be sending out invites to people. If you want to come to the event, if you're in Toronto or you're going to be in Toronto, we know there's going to be so much demand because it's a small venue. We only have 150 spots. We want to make it kind of a quaint engagement where we can all just hang out together for the night, and anybody wants to talk to me, and I want to meet everybody as well. So we want it to be a good, fun party atmosphere, exactly what the Freedom Convoy was, right?
So there will be entertainment. Comedian friend of ours, Ben Bankus, friend of the show, he's confirmed to perform.
So to get a ticket to the show, the first thing is you have to. We're going to triage the invites, and we're going to send them. We're going to send the ability to the link to buy tickets. We're going to send them by email. So first, you have to. The first tier of the triage is if you are a subscriber to honkingforfreedom.locals.com, which is where I'm doing my live stream, and there will be some exclusive content, including possibly streaming of this event, and we're still trying to figure that out. And then the second tier will be people who subscribe to my Substack, bjdichter.substack.com. So Locals got a few hundred people that subscribe, I think about 500, and I have about 100,000 people that subscribe to my Substack. So I think between those two lists, we should be able to sell 150 tickets. And so join one of those two platforms, and we'll send out links to people, and come and join us. It's going to be lots of fun. Like Daniel just said, Ben Bankus will be there doing a politically incorrect comedy set. So if you don't like political correctness, you'll have to bring your earplugs because he's hysterical. For people in the Bitcoin world, Greg Foss is going to be there. Greg Foss, who is a brilliant speaker, hedge fund manager, Bitcoin guy. He's a finance guy who got into Bitcoin later. He's not a Bitcoin programmer. He's a finance guy, but he's brilliant. He's become a good friend. And a couple of other people that will be joining us as well. But most importantly, the vibe is going to be positive. It's going to be great. It's going to be a party. And because I never got the chance to go out to the dance parties on the streets in Ottawa during the convoy. I wish I did. I was trapped in the hotel in a wheelchair doing interviews like 12 hours a day, unfortunately. So this is going to be my chance to get together with some of you and finally party and be able to hug and have some drinks together.
So I will say the most important thing you promised me that
What?
off stream. So only for people who come, they can get one of the craziest stories that I'll never tell in public about the convoy and the time we had to
with acting.
Yeah.
It involved a homeless lady, Russian accents.
God, what a nightmare.
You and Ben Bankus should recreate it.
What a nightmare that night was.
I will tell you one of the craziest side quests of the Freedom Convoy. It's not
Well,
like a main story.
You bring up an interesting point.
Yeah.
You bring up an interesting point. The book is 50,000 words. I mean, we could have made it at War and Peace. Every day could have been a book. There was so much craziness going on. But what we did was the book is not just, about me in the hotel. That's not what it's about. I did it with John Goddard, who taught me how to write a book. I've never written a book before. And thank God for him. He was an investigative journalist for 30 years. So it took us 2 months just to get the timeline of all the interviews and all the events lined up and accurate, because we wanted this to be an accurate account of what went on. So we had to interview a whole bunch of people. We told their stories. There's a guy, he's a streamer online, Dave, live from the shed, who was streaming from the shed on Parliament Hill. And he had guns drawn on him. And the only news agency that believed him when he gave them proof and defended him was the New York Times. How crazy is that? So there's so many other stories in the book, not just myself. This is a story of a whole bunch of us. And it starts in the West and it follows the convoy across the country and then ends up in Ottawa and ultimately with the misuse of the Emergency Measures Act. And we got, for the people who are Bitcoiners, there's 2 chapters on just the Bitcoin story. That could have been a story, a book in itself, because it was quite dense. But I think everybody's going to enjoy it. But I promise you one thing, you're never going to read anything more accurate than what you see in this book, Honking for Freedom.
Okay. Well, do you have a date set for that event for the book launch?
26, right?
The book launch is the 26th. The book will be shipping if you've pre-ordered shortly after then. I'm going to announce that date on the 26th. But I think what we're going to be doing is, if you get a ticket to come to the book launch, not only will you get the opportunity to give Daniel Bordman a hug, but you'll also have the opportunity to get a pre-launch copy of the book. So we're trying to do it that everybody who comes to the event will be the only ones who will actually have a copy of the book prior to its official release, just as an added perk.
And you will hear the craziest story from the Freedom Convoy that I'm never going to tell.
Maybe you'll release the story as well, like 2 months after the fact.
No.
But if you want,
I'm like when you hear, you realize like, oh, okay, that's why they can't tell it. Like they just don't. It's too much on a thing.
You'll have to write a book about it called 6 Hours or something like that. Anyway,
you have to come talk to me at a time when like there's just no cameras in my face and I can tell it to you.
Okay. Anyway, so
and anybody who's watching here, follow me. I'm doing my almost daily live streams. Sometimes on TNT when it's relevant, I stream to here. But you can follow me on YouTube, youtube.com/BJD online. So my initials, BJD online. And give me a follow and a subscribe, because I need that's also part of the strategy. Because during the commission, I do plan on commenting on what I'm seeing and who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth, because I am uniquely positioned with regards to a number of things that went on to identify who's lying and who's not.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
quite
maybe
the
for the last question, it seems like a bit of an odd last question because it's oddly specific to
I like odd questions,
story.
Wyatt. Go ahead.
It's what do you think is going to come out of Peter Slowly's testimony? Because I feel like with all the other people, you kind of know what they're going to be saying. You kind of know the perspective they're going to be coming from. Do you have any predictions about what former Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly is going to be talking about?
I think he's a wild card. Like I think I mentioned a number of times, I do have a lot of friends who are cops, and I have family who are cops. And I know all about his background. He was deputy chief in Toronto, so everybody knows who he is here. I know why so many frontline officers don't like him. A lot of them do not like him for a number of reasons. And that was in Ottawa as well, for the same reasons, the same management style. But I don't know if you saw his testimony in the parliamentary hearings. You could tell that man is under a tremendous amount of political pressure. And he seemed very, very nervous. Maybe because Junior is a spoiled brat and thinks he's going to get what he wants all the time. Guess what? It's not going to happen with me, buddy. Mr. Black, Prime Minister Blackface, it ends with me. You can bully all these people all you want. You've now met your match, and it's over. It's absolutely over. So because we are not, and I am not part of the bureaucracy, and I really don't care what he thinks or thinks he can do to us. We proved it in Ottawa that he's not going to get away with it. So Slowly, I think it's interesting because he's been kind of, I don't want to say he's a politicized officer, but he is definitely sympathetic to the political class, if we can put it that way. However, if you saw the way he answered the questions in his testimony, he was very, very careful with his words, extremely careful with his words. And a number of times, he had the opportunity right there to support Trudeau. A couple of times he gave a little bit to Trudeau that I thought was a little too much. But then in other times, he completely withdrew and pointed out some of the inaccuracies. So I don't know. I really don't know. He is the wild card in all of this. One of the many wild cards.
Just for context for people, because they probably haven't heard his name in a while. Peter Slowly was the Ottawa police chief who was the person who resigned and then was replaced by the current crazy person who's the police chief of Ottawa, who was like the person who is, to a certain extent, Trudeau's wingman on the ground and was the one who carried out the Emergency Act takedown of the protests. Slowly was the guy who basically resigned several days beforehand because he was already seemingly getting sick of the entire event overall and the pressures that were on him.
Well, I do know the real story inside of policing. He did not resign. He was told he's going to resign.
Oh, okay. And so that's very different.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's why when I watched his testimony, because I know everything that went on behind the scenes, and it was around the jerry can event is what did him in. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not here to throw him under the bus unless I absolutely have to, but I don't really care to. I know, again, I'm sympathetic. He was under a lot of political pressure. And in the beginning, when he was first asked by the so-called media, I think it was CTV, and he said, this requires a political solution at this point. And I think he said that in the hearings of City Council with the Police Services Board. He said, this is a safe protest. Nobody's been hurt. Nothing's been damaged. They're shoveling the sidewalks. They're feeding the homeless. This requires a political solution. And then he changed. Why did he change? I can tell you why he changed. Because the people in politics who constantly meddle in policing illegally did the same thing in Ottawa. You know how many circumstances I know of members of parliament calling the police, meddling with investigations? Some MPs that we both know. I know of it. And if I know of it, then everybody in the bureaucracy knows about it. And you know what? Now they've got caught because Prime Minister Blackface has put a political target on his own back. And the people who are going to knife him in the back are the Paul Martin, Chrétien era liberals. Watch that. I'm telling you, it's the Liberal Party that's going to do him in. And when I say him, his team around him.
Yeah, I mean, there's some very interesting, like, House of Cardish dynamics that I don't believe politics is House of Cards. I believe when Ben Shapiro says politics is more Veep than House of Cards, there's a truth there.
That applies to the U.S., and Canada actually is a little bit more House of Cards.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, there's some accurate, but I think one of the things to watch for is yes, you don't want the Supreme Leader to crush you, but there's also a thing of, like, this is the Liberals also, they did something wrong, they noted something wrong, and there's an internal party hunt from the Trudeau and the Butts and the Telford, the high-ups, to say, who's going to be the patsy here? Who are we going to put this on? Like, who's taking the fall?
And nobody wants to take the fall anymore. People are tired of taking the fall for them.
Right. And no one wants to take the fall. So what do people do to sort of, like, and it has to sort of, like, there's this weird thing, because if you come out guns, like, if you actually come out swinging and you say, like, okay, no, here's the truth, you kind of protect yourself, because then it becomes, like, too obvious, right? There's this middle ground you don't want to play, right? Because then you can get run over by, like, not going too far. So, and then there's the people just utterly sycophant to the Trudeau thing and lie because they know there's no consequences for doing that, just to hopefully get in further with the deep state.
Well, especially if you're the one to undermine Trudeau, you're a shoo-in potentially to become the next Liberal Party leader if you're one of those ministers who testifies and maybe says, yeah, it was all Trudeau and I had nothing to do with it, and I was told to basically put up with the Emergencies Act. If you start doing stuff like that, he'll be in a really bad position. Or even if you're not a politician and you're just some sort of liberal bureaucrat, you come out against Trudeau, you might make yourself a political figure for the NDP.
Could be. I mean, all of this is speculative political, I don't want to call it nonsense, but that's what it is. All I really care is that in this commission, the truth comes out. You're going to see two sides, I'm sure. You're going to see one political party fighting with another political party. That's really what's going to be going on there. I'm not beholden to any political party. The only people I'm beholden to, I've said this a number of times, are the truckers who were there for 3 weeks. And I know how much money they were losing by being there. That's before any sort of fines or impound that they received. To all the tens or hundreds of thousands of people that came out and supported us, the people who ran Twitter Spaces, who did live streams, who started their Twitter, their YouTube channels to tell the world of what was going on, and everybody who supported us and sacrificed, and people who are on the team, on the ground there, and the truth. That's who I'm beholden to. I'm not beholden to anybody in the political class. And I'm going to make sure of that in my testimony.
Yeah, it's going to be quite the watch, and we will be covering it here on the National Telegraph. I'm not sure if we do live streams every night, but I think there'll be, when big things happen, there'll be some recaps here on TNT YouTube, TNT Facebook, my Facebook, YouTube. And we'll keep covering. And Ben, we're happy to extend our news platform to you. And I think, it's great to have someone, with your specific skill set and an interesting life experience come, because you're sort of in the center of a major historical Canadian event in a way that, we saw just a lot of crazy nonsense happened, and you have a very good grasp of Canadian politics, and you fit our brand of not being a crazy person, but also not being like one of those suit-wearing dweebs who are like, I'm an intern in the Conservative Party. And, yes, God, Daddy Aaron O'Toole, tell me what to do.
So they kill me. Yeah, it's like when growing up watching, remember the movie Animal House, where the Conservatives were the dweebs. They were not the cool ones. They got some of them. They really need to ditch that. And I have some hope from a lot of people in Gen Z, who are doing that, and they're becoming the new counterculture. Millennials and Gen Z who understand that. We need more of that, and less inside political party dweebs, because they just kill me. They just That's
probably a great place for us to end the stream there, since we don't want to over talk up the inquiry until it happens. But I guess, like Daniel said, we'll be covering it here day to day when we can, especially if anything big happens. So just sort of stay tuned, and we'll sort of see you guys over the next week and until the inquiry's final.